supplier relationships promote corporate social responsibility? That is the topic of my conversation today with Duncan Jones. He is Vice President and Principal Analyst with Forrester Research. Hello, Duncan.
Hi, Robert. Nice to speak with you.
And with you. Thank you for being with me. So tell me about this new research report from Forrester about the impact of supplier relationships in achieving corporate social responsibility goals. What's the big takeaway that you got from this latest research?
Well, there were a couple, I think, that it was interesting research that we undertook with about 400 procurement professionals of different seniority levels, different companies around the world. One of the interesting findings was that their CSR objectives went beyond just climate change. That has been around for quite a while, but actually the respondents were saying other goals like fair employment practices, supporting local suppliers, fair trade, that sort of thing was also becoming very much more important for them. And one of the other pieces of research was when we asked about the benefits that they had obtained from CSR initiatives. They cited quite a few: better supplier relationships, maybe more resilience in the supply chain. So there were spin-off benefits from doing things right from a CSR point of view. It wasn't a choice between the two. And I think that's important to note because there is maybe an assumption that part of the CSR problem is big buyers driving down costs so much that suppliers have to cut corners in order to make a profit. And actually the respondents were clearly, a lot of them were saying, no, that's not what we want to do. We actually want to work with suppliers to improve CSR in a way that is mutually successful.
Oh, how interesting. Indeed, the phrase CSR or the term CSR incorporates so much, as you say, not just sustainability, environmentalism, but also treatment of human workers and responsible behavior in that area. So I would think it'd be hard for companies to even prioritize which aspect of CSR they want to promote first, or indeed, can they just proceed on all fronts? Can they do it all at once? Is this a dilemma that companies face, or are they just able to handle that big, gigantic package that's called CSR?
Well, it's difficult to attack all at once because they don't really have the information that they need. They're relying on supplier self-reporting quite a lot. And it's quite difficult to do detailed supplier assessments and look at everything, look at every aspect. So they really have to focus somewhere. Make a start and work with the suppliers to make the suppliers, understand that like we really believe in this, that this isn't just a box ticking exercise. Mm-hmm. We don't want you to just comply with our policies and say you are. We actually want you to comply with them really.
Yeah. We really mean it.
Yeah. And I actually, the respondents who were saying that they had been successful, a lot of them were saying this: the CSR program was driven by the CEO because it was the right thing to do for the company. It was just a marketing promotional idea, but the ones that really mean it seem to get better results. Everybody buys into it. The suppliers are more likely to buy into it if they really believe that their customer believes in it.
But a lot of times when companies fall down on their CSR goals and they fall short, or there's these very embarrassing reports about inhumane treatment of workers, it's something they didn't know about because it happened 2 or 3 tiers up the supply chain. To what extent are these companies attaining visibility of multi-tier supply chains so as to ensure that CSR goals are being propagated all the way back to the beginning of a supply chain?
Yeah, that's a difficult one, isn't it? If you're a brand and some TV company films some child in Vietnam or somewhere making your product with your brand on it, it's your brand that's at risk. And so it isn't sufficient that you said, well, that wasn't our supplier.
Yeah, so, you didn't even know that it was being made there, probably.
Well, you should have known, or at least you should have made it clear to your supplier what your expectations were about subcontracting, and ensured that they were actually verifying that they were complying with them. Again, not just ticking the box and saying, yes. I think there'd been an assumption in many industries of sort of don't ask, don't tell, that the brands didn't really want to know what was going on. And the better ones are saying, no, actually, we do want to know what's going on. There's one in Leicester in the UK where I live, where there's a big problem within the garment industry. One of the big local companies has actually banned subcontracting because they felt that was the only way to get the message across.
That's an easy way to solve the problem, is just not have an additional tier. Right.
Yeah. Well,
but there's always going to be another tier that provides raw materials and components that go into an assembly plant. So you've got to have multiple tiers. You can't ban that.
But you can do the due diligence on your supplier to say, okay, you say you're complying with my ESG policies. How are you actually doing that?
I see.
Are you buying into a community that actually does audits? Are you regularly doing your own checks? Tell me what you're doing. In the same way that you audit other things about your suppliers' controls, like their security and privacy controls. So again, it's moving from sort of self-certification to actually verifying how are you doing this.
I imagine there might be some challenges in actually measuring real progress. So what is this phrase CSR maturity? Is it a very specific, does it refer to something that can be nailed down in terms of numbers and grades and really determine how far along companies are in achieving these goals?
I think that's a difficult question to answer. I mean, most clients that we speak with are still at a fairly low level of maturity, I think. They're not sure what they need to be doing. They're not sure where to get the data from. So I think we have a ways to go before we can say this is what great looks like in terms of maturity.
Yeah, you like put a number on it or something, or so be able to say in terms of a report card that specifically refers we are this far to maturity. That apparently isn't the case. I think
it's evolving, Robert. I think what is possible now versus what will be possible in the near future. We mustn't be complacent about this, even if we're getting data from public sources. Are we opening up channels for whistleblowers to use new types of social media to alert us to things that we don't currently know about? Are we making more use of analytics to spot companies that might be cutting corners? Often the clients say, well, we're doing our checks of our top 20 suppliers. So that's not good enough. You've got to go across the board. So maturity will be going deeper so that there is assessment of the whole supplier ecosystem.
You say
I think a big part of it is a community aspect. I think one of the challenges at the moment is if a brand does an audit and finds a problem, they don't necessarily tell anyone else about the problem. They just stop using that supplier. So we've got to have some way of making this public so that everybody knows that supplier has been, offboarded by this brand. Everybody else who's considering using that supplier then is on alert that we need to check that supplier out.
Yeah, you said that a lot of it is self-reported by the suppliers themselves, but indeed there are a number of third-party audit organizations that can carry out these audits, and they're used rather extensively. I imagine, do the companies that you researched in this report, do they rely to a great degree on third-party audits, or do they mostly just trust what the suppliers are telling them?
Yeah, actually, there was a surprising number that said they were doing the assessments themselves. Maybe bigger companies, feel that they want to own that and they don't necessarily want to get into the legal issue of relying on somebody else or publicizing their own findings. The communities are really valuable, but they're not. They haven't become so ubiquitous yet that they really the full power is leveraged. In many areas. Many industries, there are some firms who are auditing, but the supplier's point of view, they still need to get audited by this one, and this one, plus 4 or 5 customers who do their own auditing. It's still too much of a workload. We need much more pooling of the information by the people who are doing the audits themselves and the various auditing bodies, so that the information is shared, I think.
Yeah. I mean, we start, of course, with the premise that CSR is the right thing to do from an ethical standpoint. That's obvious. But beyond that, are the companies that you're surveying actually realizing true business benefits from adherence to CSR precepts?
Yeah, they referred to a number of benefits. Some of it is closer supplier relationships. I was hearing about one large company was actually talking on the radio news here in the UK about some of the work that they've done to rationalize the supplier base. Because they had too many suppliers in certain categories to be able to assess them all properly. And so part of rationalizing the supplier base had actually made it more efficient and more resilient. So it was just doing a better job of sourcing. CSR had been the main driver, but it triggered them to actually have a more strategic approach to sourcing that category. And therefore they were getting that sort of spin-off benefit. Spending more money with fewer suppliers means they would have better relationships with those suppliers. And so that's one type of benefit that you get, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, it's a complex issue, but I really appreciate Duncan Jones, your sharing with us the insights into Forrester's latest research on this topic. Thank you very much for being with me today.
You're welcome, Robert.